Alright, new chapter. So what we're going to do today is to take what we have learned in the previous videos and combine them to get the ISLM equilibrium. We are also going to talk about fiscal policy. So let's begin by talking about how is the ISLM equilibrium being established. So in order to have this equilibrium in the ISLM model, you're going to need to have a simultaneous equilibrium happening in two different markets. So the first market is going to be a goods market, and the second market is going to be your money market. Okay, so let's do a quick recap on how we graphically represent each of these markets. To represent the goods market, we make use of the Keynesian cross diagram, which is a graph with aggregate expenditure on the vertical axis and GDP on the horizontal axis. So an intersection of a 45-degree line and the AE curve will give you your equilibrium output. As for the money market, we use a money market diagram, which is a graph with interest rates on the vertical axis and real balances on the horizontal axis. So an intersection of the demand and supply of real money is going to give you your equilibrium interest rates. So the Keynesian cross diagram can help us to derive the IS curve, and the money market diagram can help us to derive the LM curve. So what we're going to do is going to combine forces of these two curves to get the ISLM curve. To derive your IS curve, you're actually going to need a level of interest rates. Now, this level of interest rates is exogenous to the Keynesian cross diagram because it's not on the vertical nor the horizontal axis. So this is known as an exogenous variable, okay? And we're going to need this interest rate level to find your equilibrium level of output. And to derive the LM curve, you're going to need the income level, which is exogenous to the money market diagram, so that you can find your equilibrium level of interest rates. So that is how the IS curve needs the LM curve and vice versa. So the IS curve can actually provide the equilibrium level of output, pass it over to the LM side so that they can find the equilibrium level of interest rates, which they will then pass over to the IS side to again find the equilibrium level of output. So this is how the two curves interact with one another. I'm pretty sure that some of you have already seen your ISLM model in your study guide or your lecture notes, but you have to be careful of a too simple ISLM analysis. Okay, we know things that are simple are good, but it can't be too simple, right? So typically, what most people would analyze is this. Okay, so you got an ISLM model over here. So let's say there is a expansionary fiscal policy, like an increase of the government spending or a reduction in the tax level. So the IS curve shifts to the right, and the new income level is Y1, new interest rates is at I1, and you're at point B. So you just say that, okay, after the fiscal expansion, the economy moves from point A to point B. End of story. Well, that is not enough. Another example of this would be, okay, so you got your initial equilibrium over here. Alright, so let's say there is a monetary expansion. Okay, so the money supply increases. This causes the LM curve to shift down. Okay, so there is a higher level of income and lower interest rates. So the economy moves from point A to point B. Alright, and that's the end of your story, that's the end of your analysis. Well, this is too simple. Okay, this does not show much understanding of the topic. It doesn't show that you understand the mechanics of how the macroeconomy works because there is no intuition. And by intuition here, I'm talking about the reasoning. What is the economic reasoning behind the movement from A to B? So what we're going to go through now is the proper ISLM dynamics. Okay, so in order to make sure you have got proper analysis of the dynamics, you have to consider two simultaneous dynamics at the same time. And the dynamics that are happening would be in the goods market as well as your money market. So you need to consider these two markets when you're talking about, how the economy moves from point A to point B. So let me show you the detailed mechanics of how the ISLM model works, and I'm also going to keep it very simple at the same time. So this is your ISLM space. To derive your IS curve, you're going to need the Keynesian cross diagram. So I'm going to draw another graph on top of the ISLM space to cater for the Keynesian cross diagram. And to derive my LM curve, I'm going to need my money market diagram. So I'm going to draw another graph on the left side of the ISLM model to make space for my money market diagram. Okay, here's a quick disclaimer before I continue. I'm sure some of you might be wondering, oh my god, do you have to draw this in the exams? Well, you don't really have to, okay? I'm drawing these two extra diagrams, the Keynesian cross and the money market diagram, to illustrate to you exactly how the ISLM model works, okay? So if you do not wish to draw this in exams, no problem. Just make sure that you are able to articulate in words how the ISLM model works. Okay, so we have a initial equilibrium in the Keynesian cross diagram, and the AE curve is there based on the interest rates that we got from the money market, which we'll cover later. Okay, so the initial equilibrium in the Keynesian cross diagram is point A, all right, and this gives us a income of Y naught, and also an IS curve of IS naught. In the ISLM space, this is going to be point A, the initial equilibrium, based on the equilibrium level of output Y naught from the Keynesian cross diagram and equilibrium interest rates of I naught, which is given by the money market. Y naught will then help us to derive our demand for real money. And that demand for real money together with the supply of real money is going to give us I naught. So this is how it's going to look like. We know the interest rates has to be at I naught. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw the demand for money first. So that's L naught. And we've got the supply of money, which is a vertical straight line, and that gives us point A. And there you have your LM curve. So this is the initial equilibrium in the ISLM model given by the Keynesian cross diagram equilibrium and the money market diagram equilibrium. Okay, so let's go ahead and assume that there is an increase in government spending. So what is going to happen in these three diagrams? So obviously, your AE curve is going to shift up. Okay, so this is the basics, you should know it. Take note that the interest rate level is still the same at I naught. So the interest rate levels has not changed, but you have a new equilibrium in the Keynesian cross diagram. And this is going to give us an equilibrium output of Y1. So since the interest rates level has not changed yet, it is still at I naught, the new IS curve is going to cut through this point over here. So you draw a new IS curve, you label it IS1, and in the brackets, you're going to put G1 because government spending has changed. So let's just call that point B. Well, you know all these points can be named no matter how you want it to be. So now that income is at Y1, what will happen is that your demand for money is going to increase. So L is going to shift to the right because of the new level of income. I have used a dotted line to draw the new money demand curve because just after this, the demand curve is going to shift to the left. We all know very well that in the new ISLM equilibrium, the interest rates level will be at I1. And for that to happen, the new money demand curve will have to look something like this. So the money demand curve is going to shift right, then shift left again. Well, why is this the case? So the increase of income from Y0 to Y1 has caused the demand for money to increase, right? So when the demand for money increases, interest rates are going to increase, which then causes a fall in investment. And lower investment means lower aggregate expenditure, which also means lower income. This income level is going to be lower than Y1. So the money demand is going to fall. And that explains the leftward shift of the money demand curve. So now we need to account for the fall in investment. Okay, so the new equilibrium in the ISLM model is going to be point C, which gives us an equilibrium output of Y2. In the Keynesian cross, equilibrium is also here at point C. So the entire AE curve is going to shift down because there has been a decrease in investment due to a new level of interest rates, which is I1. So over here, you can see that point C is the final equilibrium in the ISLM. So there are two types of movements here. The first movement is an upward movement along the LM curve because the demand for money is falling due to higher interest rates. There is also an upward movement along the IS curve from point B to point C because there is a reduction of investment when interest rates increase. Talking about interest rates increasing, this entire sequence of events over here is called the crowding out effect of investment. So here's the most important part of the analysis in the ISLM model. The movement from Y1 to Y2, this reduction of income, is due to the crowding out effect. So we say that government spending has been crowded out. It has been crowded out by the reduction of investment due to the increase in interest rates. So this circled portion over here is the most important dynamics that you must be able to explain. Shall we do that again for practice? Yes, we shall. But first we gotta wait for me to finish drawing all these three graphs. That's the fastest I can make the thing go. Okay, so this time, let's assume that there is a decrease in government spending instead of an increase. So the AE curve is going to shift downwards. That's the basics. And this AE curve actually corresponds to the initial level of interest rates, which is I0. Remember, the interest rates level has not changed. So the new level of income is going to be Y1. And because interest rates level has not changed, the new IS curve is going to cut through point B, like you see over here. We now know that the new equilibrium is going to be at this intersection that you see over here. So we know that the interest rates level is going to be I1. Okay, so in the previous video, the money demand curve shifted to the right, then left. In this video, because of the fall in income, the money demand curve is going to shift to the left first, and then it's going to shift to the right. Okay, so this dotted line is the first demand curve corresponding to an income level of Y1. So the second demand curve here is L2. We'll put the corresponding income level later. So this point here is of course going to be point C, that is the final equilibrium in the money market. So the demand curve moves to the left, then to the right. Why? Well, that's because a fall in income, which leads to a fall in the money demand, is going to cause the interest rates level to fall, which then causes the amount of investments to increase, causing AE to increase, and also giving you a higher income. Therefore, your money demand will now shift to the left side. So the new increase in income will give us an income level of Y2. So we can put Y2 inside the bracket there to represent that the second demand curve for money is corresponding to an income level of Y2. So you're going to have a final equilibrium in the ISLM model at point C, but we need to account for the increase in the investment level. So the AE curve is going to shift up to AE2, and this is because of a new and lower interest level of I1. So again, there are two types of movements that we see here. First, there is a leftward movement along the LM curve from point A to point C, and that is due to an increase in the demand for money when the interest rates fall in the money market diagram. There is also going to be a rightward movement on the IS curve from point B to point C, and this is due to the investment level increasing due to the fall in interest rates level. So previously, this chunk of events here was known as crowding out effect, but now we're going to call it the crowding in effect of investment. It's called crowding in because the investments are coming in, right? So the move from Y1 to Y2, this increase of income here, is what we call government spending being crowded in by investments. So this circle portion over here is again the most important part of your analysis on the ISLM model. You must be able to explain this chain of events. Most importantly, just highlight whether it is a crowding out or a crowding in effect. Okay, now that we've nailed down the most important part, it is time for me to introduce to you two different types of views that economists have on analyzing macroeconomics. The first view is called the classical view, and the second view is called the Keynesian view. If you search the internet for the differences between these two views, you're going to get a lot of essays of answers. So I'm just going to go through three major differences between these two views. Now, the first difference is how they see prices. The classical people see prices as flexible, so prices can actually change. The Keynesian people see prices as fixed, or what we call rigid. So one thinks that prices can change, the other thinks that prices can't change. The classical view says that there shouldn't be any government intervention, whereas the Keynesian view believes that there should be government intervention. Now, why do you need government intervention? In what scenarios are we talking about? Well, I can think of two scenarios. The first scenario is when the income level is higher than the natural rate of output. So that is what we call an economic boom. So the problem with economic boom is that the economy may overheat. You get things like inflation and this kind of stuff. And another scenario is when the income level is lower than the natural rate of output. So this is what we call a recession. So when you got things like recession, you're going to have unemployment, you're going to have deflation and all this bad stuff, right? So this is where the classical economists and the Keynesian economists disagree on whether the government should intervene when there are these two types of scenarios. Okay, so let's take a look at why the classical economists believe that there is no need for the government to intervene when there is an economic boom. So the GDP level might be very high due to a high aggregate demand for goods and services. So a high demand will lead to a high level of general prices. Higher prices will then cause the real money supply to fall due to a larger denominator, and this will cause the interest rates to rise. So let's take a look at the money market to see this in action. So the real money supply shifts to the left, giving us a higher level of interest rates. So higher interest means lower amount of investments. That gives us lower aggregate expenditure, hence lower income. So income will keep falling until it goes to the natural rate of output. As you can see, the government did not intervene. The economy went back to its natural state using the price mechanism. So let's look at a case where there is a recession. So the recession was probably caused by a decrease in aggregate demand for goods and services, which then caused a fall in general price level. So the real money supply is going to increase, causing interest rates to fall, causing investments to increase, hence aggregate expenditure will increase, giving us a higher income. So income will continue to increase until it reaches the natural rate of output. So again, you can see that the government was not involved. The economy went back to its natural state using the price mechanism. Now, let's look at an economic boom under the Keynesian view, okay, where they believe that the government should intervene. So when there's an economic boom, the government needs to reduce the amount of output, right? So what they can do would be to reduce government spending or increase the tax rate, right? So you tax people more, they consume less, then the economy will start to contract. So when you do either one of these two things, your aggregate expenditure is going to fall. Hence, you will have a lower level of income. So they will continue to either decrease government spending or increase taxes until the income level falls to the natural rate of output. Well, the government can also do something else. The government can go to the central bank and ask the central bank to reduce the amount of nominal money in the economy. So when you reduce the money supply, interest rates are going to increase, investments will fall, AE falls, income falls. So they're going to reduce the money supply until the income falls to the natural rate of output. So that is how the government can be involved. So let's take a look at a recession. So in the case of a recession, the government will have to increase the GDP by either increasing their spending or reducing taxes, right? So when they do either one of these two things, aggregate expenditure is going to increase, hence you will have a higher level of income. So they will continue to do either one of these two things, either increase government spending or reduce the tax rate until income rises to the natural rate of output. If the government doesn't want to increase their spending or reduce taxes, they can go to the central bank and get them to increase the money supply in the economy. So when the money supply increases, interest rates will fall, causing an increase in investment, an increase in AE, hence an increase in income. And they will continue to increase the money supply until the income level rises to the natural rate of output. So that brings me to the end of the second key difference between the classical view and the Keynesian view. Thirdly, the classical view focuses on the long run, and the Keynesian view focuses on the short run. Well, this makes sense because it is in the long run where prices tend to be flexible, and in the short run, the prices tend to be rigid, all right, or fixed. And that is why the classical view looks at the long run, and the Keynesian view looks at the short run. So let's look at the type of graphs you need to analyze the classical view. Obviously, you're going to need the ISLM, and you also need the Ades model. The Ades model is one which shows the relationship between the price level and the GDP level. So just a quick introduction on what the Ades model looks like. So this is your AD curve and that is your AS. So AD over here stands for aggregate demand and AS here stands for aggregate supply. So of course with an intersection of the demand and the supply, then you will get an equilibrium level of output as well as a price level. So this is denoted as point A in the diagram that you see over here. We will be going through more of the Ades model in the later videos. So just to let you know, you usually need the ISLM model to derive your AD curve. Okay, so with that said, the factors that affect the AD curve are factors like these: government spending, the tax level, even your money supply. So more into this when we talk about the Ades model more formally. So to analyze your Keynesian view, all you're going to need is just your ISLM model. Well, you can actually make use of your ADS as well, but it's not going to be as useful in the case of analyzing the classical view. And the reason it is not very useful is because in your ADS model for the Keynesian view, the aggregate supply curve is believed to be a flat horizontal line, okay, as you see over here. So the price level is always fixed. You see, that is why the Keynesian view believes that the price level is fixed. No matter how much you change your aggregate demand, yes, the income level can change, like from Y0 to Y1, but the price level will be the same. If you look at the classical view aggregate supply curve, this upward sloping AS curve is what we call the short run aggregate supply curve. When the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, obviously there will be a change in the price level, when you change your aggregate demand. Do you remember that we were talking about the classical view, believing that the government shouldn't intervene when there is an economic boom or recession? So if that's the case, what you see is the long-run aggregate supply curve is actually a vertical line instead. Okay, so you see, no matter how much you change your aggregate demand, in the long run, the output level will still be the same at Y1 because of the price mechanism that will actually be able to bring the economy back to its natural rate of output. So that is how the Ades model will look like for the classical view. So this is just an introduction. If you don't understand now, it's okay, but it's just to get you prepared for the video on the Ades. Alright, so let me bring your attention to the last branch of this mind map. We're going to talk about increasing government spending, right? This is a expansionary fiscal policy, right? So the thing is that when the government increases its spending, what we will expect is the IS curve is going to shift right. Okay, and because of this rightward shift, that is why it is an expansionary fiscal policy. It's going to expand the economy. But the thing is that for the government to spend, this increase in spending must be financed, right? They got to get the money from somewhere to spend. You know, they can't just spend for free, right? So there are actually three ways which they can raise funding for their spending. So the first way will be to increase the tax level simultaneously along with the increase in government spending. Now take note that this increase in taxes is not a contractionary policy. It is simply just raising the taxes to accompany the rise in government spending. So essentially what's happening is that G0 will be increased to G1 and T0 will be increased to T1. So this represents the increase in the government spending level as well as the tax level. So to find the change in aggregate expenditure, we will need to find the function of the aggregate expenditure given by G1, T1 and deduct it away by the initial level of aggregate expenditure given by G0 and T0. So let's look at the aggregate expenditure function as a result of increased government spending and taxes. So you have T1 and G1. So this is the AE function for the new equilibrium. And here's the AE function for the old equilibrium, where the tax level is still at T0 and the government spending level is still at G0. So the next step is I'm going to remove away all the brackets. Okay, so make sure that the plus and minus signs are all correctly in place. So what you notice is there's going to be some terms that be cancelled out from each other. Okay, and what is left is going to be G1 minus G0 minus C1 times T1 plus C1 times T0. So I'm just going to group them very beautifully just like this. And what you notice is that this becomes the change in government spending minus C1 multiplied by the change in the tax rate. Okay, so this is the important part that you need. Now, we have calculated how to find the change in the aggregate expenditure due to this method of raising funding for government spending. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why do we need to go through all this math to find the change in aggregate expenditure? Well, that's because we want to compare how far the IS curve shifts out for this method of financing with the next method of financing. Okay, so for this method of financing, by raising taxes, the IS curve will shift to the right to IS1, and after your crowding out effect, you will be at point B, giving you a new level of income at Y1 and interest rates I1. Okay, some of you might be wondering, what if the government adopts a balanced budget policy, where the change in G is actually equals to the change in T? Well, let's take a look at the formula to find the change in aggregate expenditure. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to replace the change in T with change in G. So I'm going to factorize out change in G and I'm going to get this. And this is definitely going to be more than 0 because 1 minus C1 is going to be more than 1 since C1 is a figure that's less than 1. And the change in G is going to be a positive figure because this is an expansionary fiscal policy, right? So even with a balanced budget policy, the change in aggregate expenditure is still positive, which means that the IS curve will still shift to the right. So the second type of financing which we will compare to the first is by using internal debt. Okay, so what does it mean by using internal debt? Basically, the government is going to borrow money from the public. So how does it borrow money from the public? It doesn't go around saying, hey, can you lend me some cash, please? No, it doesn't, okay? Basically, the government is going to sell bonds. So a bond is basically a fancy name for an IOU. So if I were to borrow money from you, I will go to you saying that, hey, would you like to buy some of my bonds? You will say yes. Okay, so I'll write you an IOU letter that I owe you this amount of money plus interest. Okay, so that is how bonds is simply just a piece of paper to say that somebody owes you money. So by selling these bonds, the government then receives the funds that they need to increase their spending. Alright, since the government now does not need to raise the tax level, so the change in T is going to be zero. So let's look at the formula for the change in AE. Right, it's going to be the change in government spending minus C1 times 0, which eventually gives you the change in AE is simply just the change in government spending. So the change in G is obviously more than the change in G minus something else, right? So where do I get this change in G minus C1 times the change in T? It is from the first method of raising funding, which is by increasing the tax level simultaneously. So as you can see from here, by raising internal debt to fund government spending, what it means that the change in aggregate expenditure from the debt is actually more than the change in aggregate expenditure by raising taxes. In conclusion, by using internal debt, the IS curve is going to shift to the right more than raising funds through taxes, right? So going back to this diagram, the IS curve for internal debt will be at IS2, which shifts to the right more than the method of raising the taxes, right? So you have a larger income level and you have a higher level of interest rates. Okay, so this is how the two will actually compare. So take note that using this ISLM model, we're actually looking at the Keynesian view, right? Where it is in the short run and the prices are fixed. So let's not talk about the classical view because this video is really getting pretty lengthy and there's a lot of new information downloading into your brain right now. So you might think that internal debt is pretty good, but let's take a look at it from the future point of view. So there will come a time where the government needs to return the money, and we call that the bond maturing. So when the bond matures, the government will have to return you your money and it has to pay you interest at the same time. So where is it going to find this money to pay you back and to give you interest? Well, it has to, one way, raise the taxes, right? So when they raise the taxes, then consumption is going to fall, AE will fall, and income will fall at the same time. So you see, internal debt isn't as perfect as it seems. Okay, so what we can conclude is that bonds does not serve as a means of wealth, okay, especially to forward-looking individuals. Alright, because they know that in the future, the government will have to raise taxes or something else to get the money to pay them back. So that's going to reduce their wealth in the future. So this phenomenon here is known as the Ricardian equivalence proposition, something that you will encounter in the further unit of macroeconomics. So after you get good grades for your introduction to economics and you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can try taking the further unit of macroecons. So let's move on to the last method of raising funds for government spending. So the government can raise funds through the central bank. Now take note that the central bank and the government in most countries are actually two separate entities, right? So the central bank is not the same as the government, okay? They are sometimes run by two very different groups of people. Okay, so when they go to the central bank is going to print some money. Sounds awesome, right? Print money. So the central bank prints the money and it lends it to the government. So once government receives this money, then it can increase its spending. Right? So the good thing about raising money through the central bank is that it actually prevents the overcrowding effect. And it does so by keeping the interest rates level the same. Okay, so this means that the change in I is equals to 0. So yeah, this might sound like a pretty good thing, but just remember, when the government borrows from the central bank, it has to return the money to the central bank some way, somehow. Okay, so it's not as perfect as it seems. Now let's move on to the ISLM curve and let's see how this overcrowding effect can be eliminated through raising funding by the government. Okay, so this is my initial equilibrium. So what's going to happen is that the government spending is going to increase and this shifts the IS curve to IS1. Okay, and at the same time, the money supply is going to increase, right? So the LM curve is going to shift down, okay, to LM1. Okay, so you see I drew two arrows along the new IS curve. So that is meant to be the crowding out of investments, right? But because there is now an increase in the money supply, the LM curve shifts down, there is no longer that upward movement along IS1. So we then have our final equilibrium at point B, a new level of income Y1 and interest rates level still the same at I0. So as you can see, there is no overcrowding effect of investment here. Now take note that this again is the Keynesian view, okay, where we're talking about the short run and prices are fixed. And sometimes in the exams, you will have to assume that government spending increase. So when you need to assume that government spending increase, you will also need to assume which method of financing they are going to adopt. So for default, I would suggest that you use the internal debt as the assumption for how expansionary policy is going to be achieved. Okay, and the reason for this is because it's easier to explain, right? It's just going to be an increase in G. The tax level is not going to be affected. So keep things simple. Just use the internal debt method. Okay, we've finally come to the end of this video. I'm sure you would have found it very mentally taxing, but if you understand to this point, then it's a great job on your part. In the next video, we'll be talking about monetary policy. Meanwhile, I want to thank you for studying with Quickienomics. Peace.